So we have about 2 to 3 seeding games left as we continue this NBA bubble experiment, which is so far so good. And I wanted to give a few bubble thoughts. First, I wanted to talk about 2 teams in particular in the Western Conference who are not at the top or the middle of the standings, but 2 teams that are fighting to get into the 8th, 9th seed play-in matchup series. The Phoenix Suns and the Portland Trailblazers have kind of been 2 of the teams that kind of deserve to be talked about a little bit during this bubble. But let's talk about the Phoenix Suns first, because they are one of the teams that I have quote-unquote held stock in for a while, and I've been made foolish repeatedly over the years because through the failed draft picks, through the carousel of coaching staffs, and my never-ending fandom of Devin Booker and my propensity to defend Booker in any capacity, I really took a liking to the Phoenix Suns, and part of it is because I am a Sixer fan, and we all know the infamous tanking experiment, the process that the Sixers went through. And so I've grown an affinity for teams with young talent like the Memphis Grizzlies and the Phoenix Suns now. And now that the Suns have had a competent coaching staff, an adult at the point guard position in Ricky Rubio, and some of their young guys finally becoming productive, they are starting to look like an NBA team now, and we are finally starting to see what maybe a winning team will look like around 2 players, 2 young players, 2 very talented players in Devin Booker and Deandre Ayton. Now, Devin Booker, we'll get to Ayton in a second. Devin Booker has been one of the more polarizing players in the NBA, especially among the analytics community versus the eye test Twitter. Booker has been seen as this empty calorie scorer, which I don't get because Booker has shown to be he is shown to be really efficient for those type of players. Whenever someone wants to label somebody as an empty calorie scorer, usually empty calorie scorers, say Andrew Wiggins, comes with inefficiency, even for a bad team. Devin Booker put up league average efficiency for perpetually bad teams over the years. So don't give me that empty calorie scorer stuff. Not only that, he has always displayed, well, especially these last few years, he's shown to be a really good passer. He's got the corner pass to the 3 in his bag. He makes the simple read. He makes the read where he reads where the next defensive rotation is coming from and passes it one step ahead of that. He has a lot of passes in his bag. He is just a brilliant offensive player, and he's only 23 years old. And now that Deandre Ayton has finally taken a leap from being, quite frankly, a terrible rookie defensive center, has now taken the leap to becoming an average defender. And I'm someone who was very high on Deandre Ayton in college, and I was higher on his defense than most scouts. I can understand why Ayton was seen as somebody who lacked defensive instincts around the rim, but I always liked Ayton's potential as a defensive big man switching everything because he has always been able to move his feet well. He's always been able to move his feet laterally, and he even talks about it himself at length sometimes about how he can move his feet really well for a big man. And now these two as a duo are starting to form a chemistry, and it's starting to produce lineups that are actually outscoring teams on a per 100 possession basis. So currently the Phoenix Suns are 5-0 in the bubble. They just got a really big victory over the Miami Heat over the weekend, and they now stand a game and a half behind the 8th seeded Memphis Grizzlies, who are continuing to slide. And they are now a game behind the Portland Trailblazers for the 9th seed. Suns currently stand at the 11th spot and are half a game behind the Spurs for the 10th spot. So what has been sort of the keys behind the success? Well, like I said earlier, the young players are starting to play well. I mean, Cam Payne was signed by the Suns just before the bubble and has had the same effect on the Suns bench as a competent backup point guard in the way that Ricky Rubio, being an adult as a starting NBA point guard, has helped out the Suns starters. Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges in particular have given a punch to the starting lineup that has been just killing teams. according to Cleaning the Glass. The lineup of Ricky Rubio, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and DeAndre Ayton have a net rating of 19.5, and for their defensive rating, they only allow 98.4 points per 100 possessions, which would actually top the Toronto Raptors for the best defensive rating so far in the bubble, and their offense is just blistering teams. When you surround Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton with shooting and multiple ball handlers, you're going to get an efficient offense. Last year, the duo of Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, they were still figuring stuff out, and Igor Kokoskov really wasn't running plays with Booker and Ayton together, not with the frequency that we have seen this year. And their net rating together as a duo last year was minus 5.5 per 100 possessions, the net rating. And now this year, we have seen them all year be productive, always outscoring teams, as any lineup with Booker and Ayton in it is now outscoring teams by 3.4 points per 100 possessions. Well, what's the catalyst in that working? Well, one again, Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson are credible NBA players. Kelly Oubre obviously is a really good scorer, and earlier in the year, if you just took Cam Johnson out of the lineup and put Kelly Oubre in the starting lineup, you get the same productivity in terms of net rating, offensive efficiency, and defensive efficiency. It was actually the best lineup they ran this year. But so far in the bubble, you take Kelly Oubre out and you put in Cam Johnson, and you're getting the same effects. I'm a big fan of what the Suns are doing. Devin Booker's been getting disrespected for too long, and now he's finally showing everybody why he's one of the best young players that are up and coming in this league. And DeAndre Ayton is finally showing that he is going to be one of the up and coming good young big men in the league. But the Phoenix Suns have been fun to watch so far. The other Western Conference team I was mentioning earlier, the Portland Trailblazers, have also been really interesting to watch, especially now that they've got their full front court back with Jusuf Nurkic and Zach Collins returning to the starting lineup. I have been a big Nurkic fan for a long time. I was a fan of him in Denver when him and Jokic were fighting over minutes, and Michael Malone was either starting or benching one of them or trying to start the two together, and he eventually had to choose. Nurkic goes to Portland and was a godsend for guards like Dame and CJ McCollum, who can run off the ball and run off Nurkic dribble handoffs, which they have clearly missed all year. The 4-month shutdown hits because of the pandemic, and Nurkic is able to return from the gruesome broken leg injury that he suffered last season. And the offense, you can tell it's just night and day. It's a well-oiled machine, and honestly, Nurkic's absence to me kind of highlights more of the absurd season that Damian Lillard has had, trying to keep this Blazers team afloat to even be in contention to get a bottom spot in the Western Conference playoff bracket. I mean, the team they lost all of their wings. They lost Zach Collins early in the season. They lost Nurkic to start the year. Well, they lost Nurkic last year before last year's playoffs, and going in obviously throughout most of this season. You're having to play Hassan Whiteside big minutes. You're having to sign Carmelo Anthony from the streets, and Melo has been a productive player for the Blazers. I'm really glad he's back in the NBA. But having Nurkic and Collins back has bolstered the Blazers' very thin front line. Gary Trent Jr. was having a really good year for a second-year player that had a role that was in the rotation, and then in the bubble, he all of a sudden has turned into a supercharged 3-and-D player. And Gary Trent's emergence has really kind of mitigated the need for wing versatility around CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard. They still need it, obviously, but the glaring hole isn't as pronounced as it once was, especially since Ariza didn't accompany the team on the trip to the NBA bubble, and Rodney Hood has been out, unfortunately, with a torn Achilles. The Blazers getting Gary Trent Jr. to emerge like this in the bubble has helped bolster the wing/guard depth a little bit and gives them an extra shooter and a defensive wing around McCollum and Lillard. The Blazers, before the pandemic, had a 112 offensive rating, which was good for 10th in the end. Well, tied for 9th with the Denver Nuggets. But since the bubble has started, the offensive rating for the Blazers has been 120, and a lot of it is because Jusuf Nurkic, his passing ability, his offensive skill, has really just been a help for the Blazers. Damian Lillard can get more of his points in a different variety of ways. CJ McCollum is free roaming off the ball. It just looks more and more like the Blazers offense that we saw last year, even though it was teetering on top 10 this year, is more because of Damian Lillard's just, quite frankly, is one of the historic seasons we've seen from a point guard. And I know historic is a word that seems to be thrown around more and more these days. You just got to look at the scoring season Damian Lillard is having. I mean, it's been spectacular. And the fact that he was able to keep this Blazers team afloat with all the injuries and a depleted roster and everything else, you kind of have to rethink the Blazers' future now a little bit. Now that Nurkic is back, hopefully Zach Collins, I mean, you're going to have to mulligan this year because Collins had a really unfortunate shoulder injury, but you hope that Collins takes a leap next year into the big man they're hoping he will be, which is somebody that could stretch the floor, is athletic enough to stay on the perimeter on defense, etc., etc. You got Gary Trent Jr. emerging. You think if the Blazers were able to hit on their late first-round pick this year again and bolster the rotation, hopefully the player they draft will be productive and in the rotation right off the jump, that maybe the roster construction around Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum doesn't look as in peril as maybe it did 8 months ago, or maybe honestly even 2 years ago, especially after all the contract extensions that were handed out. I mean, I don't think I'm breaking any news here saying that I think they can beat the Grizzlies, especially now that the Grizzlies, one, they traded away their veterans and were actually sliding before the NBA season was suspended. But now the Grizzlies have still been sliding, and they lost Jaren Jackson Jr. to a meniscus injury for the rest of this part of the season. So you think the Blazers would be heavily favored in a play-in, or if the Grizzlies keep sliding and the Suns end up passing up the Spurs to 10 and hopefully getting into 8 or 9, you would think we would get a play-in series between the Blazers and the Suns. But this bubble has shown, one, what a healthy Blazers team looks like, and two, maybe now we can rethink what their future around the backcourt of Lillard and McCollum look like now that they have their full complement of players. Well, of course, minus Trevor Ariza and Rodney Hood. But in the same vein as Ariza and Hood, if the Blazers make more fringe signings and moves like that this upcoming offseason, which is going to be in October, which will be absolutely weird, then maybe they could hit on the right amount of wing and guard versatility to put around their star backcourt and a center who is really, really, really underrated. I think Nurkic is one of the very best young big men in the game. I think he has a lot of potential. I think he's a very smart defender, not the vertical rim protector that you would think of Rudy Gobert or Joel Embiid or somebody like that, but he's smart. He knows where to be. He is a brick when it comes to setting screens, and that skill is needed to spring free the sharpshooters that are CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard. Going into the bubble, people were maybe hoping for two other teams in the play-in series, but the Blazers and the Suns might have something to say about that. And honestly, it might just be as fun of a series.